This is Theory of Change. I'm Matthew Sheffield.
History repeats itself, people often say. So often, in fact, that it's become a cliché. But that idea is also true in a lot of ways with technology. Not only have we, as humans, recapitulated many of the inventions of our predecessors, sometimes unwittingly, sometimes on purpose, but also many of the issues and ideas and challenges and controversies that have existed for past technologies exist for present ones as well, even though we may not realize it. And that's certainly true with regard to today's artificial intelligence technologies. Not only are they based on ideas that have been around for a number of years, they also present many of the same fundamental challenges that have existed with regard to other technologies, whether it is calculators in schools or whether it is fascism on the internet. Technology and its social controversies are probably as old as humanity itself, and they have only become more important as things have accelerated in the past few decades. And in that regard, I am glad to present to you a discussion today with Dave Karpf. He is a political scientist and an associate professor at George Washington University, where he specializes in technology, its history, and its application to current social controversies. We get into a lot of those in this episode. I hope you'll enjoy. Theory of Change is part of the Flux Media Network, so go to flux.community for more podcasts and episodes about politics, technology, media, and religion, and how they all intersect and affect the culture. And if you want to support the program, that is very much appreciated. We have paid subscription options on both Substack and Patreon. Just go to flux.community where you can subscribe. On either way, there's a link to the Patreon in the sidebar there. But if you want to go directly there, you can go to patreon.com/discoverflux. And if you're able to support financially, that's fantastic. But we also have free options as well for those who cannot afford to do that at this time. Stay in touch. I'd love to have you join the discussion. Thanks very much. And joining me now is Dave Karpf. Hey, Dave. Welcome to Theory of Change.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so you have been somebody who has been trying to get the larger center left to have more coherent thoughts, I think, about technology and policy in a way that I wish was more common. So congratulations on that, first of all.
Thank you.
And one of the things that you've done that I think is really important is that in order to have coherent conversations about technology, you have to understand the history, and that so many of the problems that exist in the current moment really do trace back to things that happened decades ago. And we keep rehashing the same controversies like content moderation and banning, and these are things people were haggling about when Usenet was a thing, which right. I say that now, and a lot of the listeners are like, what the hell is Usenet? Well, look it up, guys. I won't bother you with it.
I feel like my life motto for the past 7 or so years has been history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Right. So I'm a political scientist by training. I'm not an actual historian, but my approach to history, all the work that I do on tech now originated from reading all the back catalog of Wired magazine to just get a sense of what were people saying the digital revolution was going to look like as it has been arriving for my entire adult life. And as you look at that, what you start to notice is, the things that we're saying about, for instance, AI today sound a lot like what we were saying about big data 15 years ago. We can maybe learn some lessons from how that worked out. Not to say that history will always repeat itself, but there's at least have some informed skepticism by noticing that we're always saying the same things and making the same promises.
Mm-hmm. Well, so for people who weren't paying attention earlier to the big data hype, give us a little overview on what happened with that.
Sure. So big data, this is late aughts into the mid-teens, was the digital future. And the idea essentially was, now that there is all this data being shared online, now that we have, so Web 2.0 is the early aughts and mid-aughts. That's when everybody starts contributing content online. And then you have the rise of data scientists saying, we can analyze all of this to figure out patterns that you never could have understood before because we didn't have the data. So the rise of big data was both promising to revolutionize economics, but also dating life. The guy who founded OkCupid wrote a whole book about how, based on the data that we have from OkCupid, we can finally solve for romance. I'm like, that was a fun book to read. Like, I enjoyed reading that book. But there was a while where like people really believed that now that we have all of this data, we will apply basically fancy regression analysis and we will crack the code of humanity. And within a few years, what we find out is almost none of that is panning out because humanity is more complicated than we thought, right? Like we thought 15 years ago, we've cracked romance. We will now figure all that out. And now I'm reading culture stories about how like young people these days, like don't date and don't have sex anymore. So like something went south. And that's not to say that it's OkCupid's fault, but it is to say that the ambitions of 15 years ago didn't work out. And it's basically because the world turned out to be more complicated than we thought. But then when you hear Sam Altman and other people say like, no, now the AI is essentially saying we're going to do big data, but without the data scientists. Like it will do regression analysis on itself. And finally, we will crack the code of humanity. And I think we can take a step back and say, I keep hearing that promise as though now that we have all the data, we can regression analyze our way to the promised land. Every time it's turned out that human society is more complicated than that, that's probably true here as well.
Yeah. Well, and cognitive science certainly does. Like my biggest frustration with so much larger tech discourse or even academic discourse is that there's just everything is siloed. So no one knows anything about anything else, and you're not allowed to. And in fact, if you try to import some ideas from another field into your PhD, people are like, "No, stop it! This is wrong. It's out of scope. You need to stop this." And like to me, like that's what is just so horribly ironic that there's this drive toward artificial general intelligence, and yet human general intelligence is hated. In academia, you're not supposed to be a generalist. You're not supposed to have a deep knowledge of 2 or 3 fields. It's not allowed. Am I wrong?
So I want to push on that a little bit because my career has been based on people saying, actually, Dave, we're going to let you do that. My dissertation project was somewhere between social movements and political communication and interest groups. It didn't fit anywhere. I was studying MoveOn.org and how organizations like that differ from older advocacy groups like the Sierra Club. And I remember having one of my dissertation committee members say to me, hey, this is really good. You're not going to get hired to a political science department, right? And my answer was like, I didn't know that until you just told me that right now. Do you think I'll get hired somewhere? And he was like, oh, we'll see. Which was, as an aside, not a great thing to say to young me. Kind of freaked me out. Like when that came out as a book, I was quite worried about exactly what you're talking about, that the book was borrowing from too many literatures and therefore didn't fit in any of them. And I mean, mostly just as luck. The reaction from each of those different disciplinary communities was, oh, he's not one of us, but he's talking about things that we care about, so we're going to chat with him as sort of like an interesting visitor. So like sociologists don't treat me as a sociologist, but they do treat me as somebody who they would be happy to hang out with. And historians, like on this Wired project, historians have repeatedly been like, hey, that's really cool. Like they're not fooling themselves. They don't think I'm a historian, but they think that I'm somebody from a different field that they're happy to chat with. I do think it's very hard to do that, and you need to get very lucky in the way that I've gotten. But honestly, I think the reason for that is throughout your and my adult lives, we have been starving the academy for resources. And as resources get more scarce, then we end up falling just into the silos as sort of the only thing that's still around. So like, again, to make it all about me for a second, I finished my dissertation in spring of 2009 and I was going on the academic job market as the worldwide economic crash was happening. It was not a great time to do it. And one of the things that happened is people who do weird interdisciplinary work were left out to dry first because we're the oddball weirdos. And when most of the jobs go away, those jobs definitely go away. So I caught a postdoc and sort of got lucky and searched for a couple of years until I could land somewhere. But academic job market now is so much worse than it was even back then. So I think you're right about the siloing, but I don't think that's part of the way academia behaves with itself. I think that's just the way that we end up reverting to when we starve it for resources. So I think that'll get worse until we decide we value higher education as a society and we're going to fund it like we did back in the 1970s. I think then good times could arrive again.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. It is really incredible, though, when you look to the early 1970s, that all that investment that was put in, we're still reaping the benefits of it.
Yeah.
Nearly 50 years or more than 50 years. So, but that's not an argument that has any currency with the Trump administration, and they're trying to cut it systematically and then also censor it in a really horrible and disgusting way, and with no regard to the repercussions. And that is it. To me, I see this as just a natural reactionary social theory, that they really believe that knowledge must be stopped from the moment that I arrived on the scene. And we can't learn anything else. There is no history. There is no future. There is only what I am interested in, and nothing else.
As an aside, did you see the Mark Andreessen comments from like a week or two ago about higher ed?
Only briefly, but go ahead and summarize it.
The short version is Mark Andreessen is an asshole, and I know that that's going to be a huge shocker to your listeners. Andreessen, whose career, like his life was made by being part of a lab at a public university. He went to University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, where, thanks to Al Gore's information superhighway bill, he was part of a lab that got to work on internet stuff, and that's where he built Mosaic, which then they just copied over and made private for Netscape. Like, that's where he started out. But he has now decided that MIT and, let's see, I forget the exact quote, but he basically said that he thinks MIT and Stanford are just lobbying shops for, like, the baddies now, and that we need to, like, destroy all of higher education in order to save it, because now higher education is just investigating things that Mark Andreessen himself doesn't like anymore. Like, he got up the ladder, and now the people who are lower down the ladder aren't clapping for him loud enough, so we must burn the whole thing down. Fuck that guy.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is a classic. This is the reactionary epistemology, that it's an arrested psychological development in which everything is egocentric. Like, it is literally a child mentality that other minds don't exist, don't have intentionality, and if I can't understand something, then it's worthless.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that you've been writing recently, or you wrote a little squib on it on your blog, is about the idea of the existing large language model AIs as being satisficing. And yes, I did say not satisfying. So just for everybody who's listening, that was not an error on my part there. And you'll get into that, but I found it very related to, so the guest before you on the show, which I'm sure haven't seen yet, it was Venkatesh Rao, and he has this idea of mediocrity. And I thought there's an interesting parallel between what Venkat was talking about here and what you were talking about with satisficing. So tell the audience what you meant by that in that context, if you would, please.
So satisficing is not a term that I made up. It's a term that Herbert Simon made up in the 1970s. Yeah. He actually won a Nobel Prize in economics for the concept in it was either 76 or 78. So I learned about it in grad school. My wife's a lawyer. No lawyers that I have ever found have heard this term, even though grad students like me back in the day were obsessed with it. And satisfice is the combination of satisfy and suffice. The idea, like, it was originally proposed as an alternative to rational maximizing. So the theory of satisficing is that rather than, like, if you are searching for information, rather than obsessively searching for the perfect information, which would take a lot of time and therefore there would be opportunity costs, that the more efficient thing to do is to first establish the threshold at which you've reached good enough information. Then you search, you use your time and energy until you've reached that threshold, and then you stop. And in practice, the reason why I find that useful for AI is, like, I often hear AI promoters talking about how we are building superintelligence, we're building digital God, we're building a thing that is going to be better than the best authors at writing texts, better than the best scientists at doing science. For actually existing AI, that strikes me as actively not being the case. What actually existing AI is quite good at is arriving at averages, right? Like, the thing we've known ever since this stuff came out, that it's tremendously good at producing, I'm forgetting the term now because I should have had more coffee before we chatted, clichés. That's the word. It will give you cliche laden text, because clichés are clichés for a reason. They're the thing that people always say. And that means that these large language models that are foundationally about guessing the next word, what's the likely next word in a sequence of words, they're going to fall into that average thing. It means that they're not going to produce the very best novel, but they can produce a pretty average novel. And if you want to mash up different genres, you can do the average of all those genres, which can be surprising, delightful, kind of cool. It can also hallucinate and have all sorts of errors. So you wouldn't want to use AI to diagnose your cancer. Holy crap. You might want to use AI. Like one of the early examples that came out in like 2022 of how cool this stuff was somebody who was using AI to plan their trip to Disneyland. And critics pointed out, yeah, but it has you going on a ride that is currently out of operation, so haha, it's wrong. I don't know if you've ever been to Disneyland with kids, but when you go to Disneyland, the goal of a parent is to survive that trip. So, that's a great example, like the type of case where what you really need to do is Satisfice. You do not need to plan the perfect Disneyland vacation for you and your small children. You need to plan one that'll get you through the day. And if we've set the threshold of, I just need something that's okay, something that is average and maybe kind of cliched, because I'd be happy to take my kids on a cliched Disney vacation, that's the point, then that's the type of task that AI is quite good for, or at least actually existing AI that we have today. And there are a lot of tasks where that is useful, but then we want to separate out those tasks from tasks like, I don't think that we're going to have AIs writing speeches for major political candidates, because major political candidates are willing to spend a lot of money to believe that they're getting the very best possible speeches. That's not a space where you would expect to see AI or where you would expect to do better than the best speechwriters. So we're not going to see it there. Where we're going to see it is in places where really what we need to do is produce the 50-page report for an audience that was never planning to read the report. They just wanted to know that it was produced. That's the type of thing you use it for. And this then leads to the second point that I was making in that post was part of the tension right now with actually existing AI is that my personal Satisficing threshold as a writer is very different than the Satisficing thresholds of the people who own major news publications, right? Because private equity bought a lot of these things out. They do not care about the product. They just want to skim out the money. So many of us critics called it a couple of years ago that what these technologies are going to get used for, at least in the near term, is lowering the quality of the outputs while cutting the costs. That is exactly what's been happening, and it's unsurprising, not because it's something fundamental to AI, but because it's something fundamental to the structure of a lot of these industries. If the owners of these industries don't care about the product, then their Satisficing threshold will be so low that, of course, they're going to fire the journalists, they're going to fire the workers, and just have a shitty product instead. They didn't mind having a shitty product.
Yeah. And that's a good point. And it's also this happened before AI. So these publications, the big city dailies, the large magazines and other news organizations, they replaced their senior writers with interns about 15 years ago. And so, and that's why people sometimes they're like, well, why are all my favorite writers now on Substack or Ghost or whatever? And it's well, because they were fired by the greedy corporations who were paying their salaries, that instead of cutting executives and replacing them with more experienced writers, which is what they should have done, because media companies are just full of wasteful executives who do nothing. Having worked for several of them, I can say that. They could be very easily great examples of a flat organizational structure in which the senior producers of the content are the ones who do most of the management. But that's not what they do. They're very stuffed with executives who produce nothing and mostly get in the way and have outdated knowledge. So, but they don't. And so what they did instead was they said, okay, well, this woman is making $120,000. Well, a year. Well, we're going to axe her. And it doesn't matter that she's beloved by our community. Doesn't matter that she gets us, these mega links, every month or so. We don't care, because we're just going to flood the website with intern copy. And so in a lot of sense, what these big companies are using AI for, that's what they did with interns.
Yeah. Well, so Megan Greenwell used to run Deadspin before private equity destroyed Deadspin. She wrote a book, just came out a month or two ago, called Bad Company, which is all about this, about private equity eating America. And it's a great book, and listeners should check it out. One of the things that stands out, too, is when they are buying these companies, not only are they firing the good writers and replacing them with interns, they're also buying them layering them with debt and then wrecking the company, like selling the company off for parts, and then just declaring bankruptcy, and the company has to cover the debt. So like, it would be one thing if they were like ruthless businessmen who are making the thing actually more efficient. What they're actually doing is like just socializing the risk while privatizing the gains, never understanding the industries that they're destroying because they're just seeing them as profit centers. And that's happening not just to journalism, but I mean, Greenwell's writing about how it's happening to real estate, it's happening to healthcare. Like, this is like just an absurdity of the tax code that a few very rich people have figured out how to wreck things with. And of course, AI is going to make that worse because if all they're interested in doing is maximizing funds while like exploiting degrees in the tax code, AI will be very good for that. It doesn't have to be that way. It's not in the technology, but it's pretty predictable that that's how things are going to end up.
And yet, on the other side, AI also has allowed people from the bottom up to do a lot more things than they were able to. So, and I think just an immediate, obvious example of that is that a lot of people are now using, AI generated images for their books or, their articles, or people that, may not have a lot of artistic talent, but they have an aesthetic sense. And if they give, really detailed prompts, they have come up with some really neat stuff. Now, if it's not satisficing to an artist who's looking at that stuff and they're like, oh, I can see this looks like so-and-so. And, where this literally ripped me off. Like, hey, these are fair points. But on the other hand, it is, I think, very arguably true that it has enabled a lot of different types of creativity from people who had no access or ability to do it before. And I think we have to say that.
So I think that's right. I have used AI images in my Substack occasionally. I haven't done it in a year or so because it started to feel kind of gross. And my thinking at the time was much like what you're saying, that like it's a free Substack. I was not going to pay an artist because there's no money in that Substack. And I'm not an artist myself. So I would write an essay for Substack and then I would think, what image fits this? And I would fiddle around with some free AI tools until I got one that was good enough. And again, like this to me points out the gap between what the technologies can do and what their broad social effects are likely to be if things go the way they normally go. Because I think that would be basically fine if we lived in a world that funded the arts the way we funded the arts in the United States just post New Deal, right? If we still had like a works progress administration and a bunch of public funding where people who are serious artists can make a living doing their art. And then also we had a set of technologies that made it really easy for me to like give a prompt and get an image. I feel like in mass people would be pretty fine with that, right? Like the crisis of AI, like when we talk about AI and fair use and copyright, that's happening in a context of, oh God, how are we going to pay? How are artists going to be able to make a living given the world we were already in and the way that this stuff is probably going to get used? So if we were to build a big safety net, then I think a lot of that stuff would end up being fine. But it's all in the backdrop of, wow, the tech billionaires are probably going to say a few, like Sam Altman likes to say a few nice words about the safety net and then go off and like rip off some copyright some more while the safety net does not materialize. And he ends up supporting Trump because he feels like he needs to do that to get his company ahead. So under those contexts, I think a lot of the copyright critiques, like they're sort of cries for the actual world that we live in today and how things are likely about to get worse. But like, yeah, if we could fix the safety net, then like, hell, let's also democratize the ability to create images. That'd be fun.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, yeah, I mean, I think that the bigger challenges of AI and what may come, or we'll say LLMs, so not AI. We'll say the biggest challenges of LLMs are not what they themselves can do because they have no volition. There is no rise of the machines coming from a chat GPT,
right.
Because it has no semantic grounding. And so, but the biggest problem is what people who have the money use them for. Like that's actually the real problem. Yeah. And we're seeing a lot of bad stuff with that. And just a few weeks ago, there was a piece that Ars Technica published, which we'll link in the show notes here, that was lamenting how a lot of hiring managers were feeling overwhelmed by a deluge of AI generated resumes and responses to their questions and whatnot.
And if you go in the comments of that piece, it's just filled with people saying, you know what? You assholes in HR started all of this. This is your fault. You're the ones that, screen people based on supposed qualifications that you don't even know about. And your entire industry is based on knowing about the process of checking accounting boxes and insurance things. That's what you do. You don't actually know anything about hiring and who's a qualified applicant. And so you guys did this to yourself, and now it's just the people fighting back with the same tools that you are the ones who started. I mean, it was pretty hilarious reading all those comments, I thought.
Yep.
Did you want to riff on that, though? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it's just, again, like that intersection of, I have a line that I've used on the blog, and it's going to be I have a book coming out next year that'll be in the book, that the trajectory of any emerging technology bends toward money. And the point there is, when we're imagining the various digital futures that could come to pass, the one that is likely to happen if there is not regulation, if there is not public resistance, if there is not pressure to alter the course of the future, it's going to bend towards wherever the money is. And so, yeah, we've built up these big systems where like hiring managers say, like, how do I manage this so that I can have more efficiency and less work for myself? Under that system, like, yeah, like, what did you think was going to happen? Of course, people are going to try to figure out, if there is a game with rewards, how do I try to win it? Particularly when the stakes are, will I have a job or not? Like, what did you think was going to happen, guys? And yeah, there's some good comedy in it, because it's like, you thought AI was only going to be useful for saving you time? No, people are going to use it. Like, everybody else is going to use it too. This is, again, some of the earliest things that critics were warning about with AI was, we're going to use AI to produce 10 times more emails that will then get summarized by AI, that's the Red Queen's race, right? Like, that is just moving faster and faster to stay in the same place. Like, this is not the grand social transformation we keep being promised. It's just more and more text that fewer and fewer people have time to read.
Yeah. Well, within the technology world, there's often this, vague, almost messianic notion of the technological singularity and, artificial general intelligence. And like, look, I'm not going to say that's never going to happen, because, it probably will. But when, who knows? Like, definitely the stuff we have now, that's not it. But let's say that it would happen at some point. Fine. But the first singularity that happens is, how do we not destroy ourselves with the shit we already have?
Right.
Because that's the real disinformation problem. Because I see people saying, oh, the AI is going to be used to flood the internet with bullshit. And it's like, hey, have you used the internet?
Right.
And it's like, so that's the first singularity is bad epistemology on the part of humans. And a lot of that really goes back to a failure of refusal to invest in not just college education, but also just adult education. Because I think that's what we really need a lot of money coming in, because no one has any access to stuff once they go out of college. And most people never go to college or never get a bachelor's degree. So the government has no use, or, doesn't want to talk to them, doesn't want to help them grow, doesn't want to help them think better. And we're really facing the problems of that, because a lot of people, they went to, fundamentalist Christian high school, K through 12, and that was it. And so when their education taught them that, Ken Ham is a real scientist, and that evolution is fake, and that Jesus is coming back next week, that's what their education taught them. And we have nothing to say to them when they're adults and when they're voting. And then we wonder, and we lament, oh gosh, these people are so stupid. What the hell's wrong with them? Look how smart I am. And it's like, well, are you that smart when you don't try to help anyone else learn? I don't think so. And science, to me, the obligation of science isn't just to explore, the world and to understand how it works. It's also about telling the public what you've learned and why it fucking matters. Because if you don't, then you're just building an ivory tower that the barbarians are going to topple. Right. That's what's going to happen.
So I think that's right. This reminds me of a piece that I wrote, 2019, 2020, like a while back. So like pre-AI universe, more on misinformation and disinformation and its effects. because one of the bits that stands out in the piece, this was for Social Science Research Council. It's called on Disinformation and Democratic Myths. And one of the bits that I tried to build out there was this idea of load-bearing myths in a democratic society. Like the reason I'm thinking of this is like you're right about the public's lack of knowledge today, and also we've never had a public that was as well informed as our democratic ideals. Right? Like we have never had a public. I mean, this was one of the crises of democracy that came out in I think it was like the 30s and 40s, right when they started doing public polling. One of the first things that they found out was, oh, the mass public really does not know much about public affairs. How can they live up to their democratic ideals, like their democratic commitments, if they're not so well informed, according to our polling? And the argument of the piece is essentially, we've never had a well-informed public, but we did have this myth of the attentive public amongst political elites, who largely because they didn't want to get yelled at by Walter Cronkite. And they imagined if they get yelled at on the nightly news, then the people, with the capital P, will know, and they might toss you out of office. And that then led to us having political elites who behaved as though there was a well-informed and attentive public, even if there wasn't. And I actually don't think, again, if we go back to like the late 2010s, when we were mostly focusing on misinformation, disinformation, as opposed to AI stuff, I've actually never really seen misinformation and disinformation as a large direct threat to democracy, but the indirect threat of elites coming to realize, oh, you can just say shit. Nobody is paying attention. And so, like, you can engage in rampant graft and corruption. Nothing bad will happen to you. Like, that starts to happen. And certainly during Trump 1, that starts to happen, where they realize there's no consequences to behaving as though the public doesn't pay attention. And that's where democracy really starts to collapse. Because we've never had a mass public that lived up to our ideals, but we did have political elites that behaved more like we did. And so if they all behave, if they have those norms that lead them to behave as though people are paying attention, you don't get a perfect democracy, but you have a barely functioning one. And now what we're seeing, and I think this accelerates with AI, because now they're realizing, hey, we can really just lie about things and no one will kick you out of office. Nothing bad will happen. Now, you can engage in massive corruption. People will move on. They won't pay attention, or they won't realize to begin with. And so you can just do that and no consequences will occur. And that's that's part of how you end up in authoritarianism, which is frankly what's happening right now. It went dark real quick, didn't it? I just ended up going dark.
Yeah, well, but that is the democracy is always in a crisis inherently, because it's based on the voices and opinions of people who aren't paying attention. Like that is the paradox of democracy, and I would push back the timeline in some of that discourse becoming really pervasive within American elite cultures to the rollout of public education by people like Horace Mann, because and the progressive era educators that were before him, that they had this idea, look, we're going to have this system here. Well, we have to let at least some of the public know what's going on. We have to teach them literacy, and the world has just become so much more complex that the obligation and responsibility of the government should have increased over time. But instead, what's happened is it's decreased, and we're at this moment where so many administrators of universities and other places like that, or elite news organization executives or editors, they just took everything for granted. That they thought that everything was the myth of the attentive public, but also the myth of the honest politician, which is like the paradox, because the public themselves don't believe in the honest politician, but the American governmental system seems to have been structured in that way. And that's why the Trump can do all these things, because the norms don't save you, because the norms are nothing, as it turns out.
Or at least norms are not self-enforcing.
Yeah.
And part of this too, and if we look at higher education, I can't be too mad. I personally find I can't be too mad at university administrators who weren't prepared for this assault on higher education. Because part of the immediate reaction is, wait, higher education is one of our comparative advantages to the world. what fucking idiot would want to destroy this? Like, you're running the country. Don't you want things to go well? And
the answer
like,
is no.
I think everyone should have expected that they would apply some pressure, given things that already happened with New School in Florida and elsewhere. But like this all-out assault, in the same way that like I was pretty skeptical about the fate of American democracy when Trump won the second term. I did not think that they were going to demolish like NIH and NHS. Like, I didn't think that they would decide we are just not going to do cancer research anymore. Like, I didn't think that they would be on Team Cancer. I didn't think they would outlaw all vaccines and try to bring all that back, because that's just so stupid.
Wow.
And yet they are. And like, if you look at public opinion polling, about 60% of the country says like, we kind of wish you were still trying to deal with cancer, but not in any way that's actually going to take power away from them. So like, they will stay in power. They'll continue enriching themselves while they do things that are like demonstrably awful. Like that,
Yeah.
like it's just bad, but it's also, it's bad in a way that is so absurd that like, I do find myself routinely just thinking like, this isn't just the worst timeline. Like, this is the dumbest timeline. Like, why are they doing these things?
Well, and I would say that is kind of my whole shtick, actually, Dave. That like, this is a movement that is run by people who hate modernity. They hate science. They hate independent administration. They hate competence, because all of these things are liberally biased in their viewpoint. Like the idea that having a spoil system, that's what they want. They want to be able to appoint their friends and have as much corruption as they want, and because they think they're entitled to it. And, any other institution that they cannot directly control, which has, that it's bad. And in fact, and you see this really a lot in the work of that Curtis Yarvin guy, that, he really believes that an independent public civil service is a threat to democracy. He actually believes that in some weird, twisted way, but and I guess in a very simplistic sense, that's true. That you could say that, well, it's not, directly accountable to the voters. Well, sure, that's true. But on the other hand, Donald Trump is doing things the voters don't want. Like, no one asked him to do any of these things, that you're talking about. Cut NIH, and like, no one asked for any of these things. So they don't apply their own critique to themselves. And it's because, again, like reactionaries have dumber ideas. Like, that's really what it comes down to. And they're mad that everyone knows it. Like, that's really why they're rushing around to tear everything down. Because I can say this as a former, Republican activist myself, that there's this inherent idea that people are unfair to me and us, and they have no interest in understanding their own ideas and whether they actually approvable, whether they are, can affect anything positive, because they don't actually have a positive agenda. Their view is this world sucks. Life is unfair, and you know what? If you don't like it, get over it. And maybe you can, and go, I'll give you a gun. That's basically their worldview. And we saw that most particularly, I think, with the Trump COVID policies. Essentially, what the right wing literally was asking him to do was do nothing. Let it rip. Let people die. That is literally their viewpoint. And it's so ghastly and it's so horrible that it is almost unbelievable that your fellow humans could have this viewpoint, but they do.
Yeah. I've written on this a bit, and I always end up talking about it in one of my classes. I've often thought that the real dividing line isn't sort of a clear left versus right, but a theory of politics and society where one says the world is very simple and the other says the world is very complicated. And the nice thing about believing that the world is really quite simple is it gives way to this sort of very comforting authoritarian messaging, populist authoritarian messaging of like, the problems that you see in your lives are because crooks and idiots are in charge. Put me in power, I will get rid of the crooks and idiots, and then everything will be fine. And the side that is sort of standing up for liberal technocracy is saying, no, the world is very complicated. Put us in charge, and we will have people with good values try very hard to make things better at the margins. Also, mistakes will be made, and also there are some crooks and idiots, and we'll sort of manage that just as we go, but things will get a little better if we work very hard for a long period of time. And I teach political communication. Like that latter message sucks. It is ghastly, but it's also true, right? So but the authoritarian message, particularly as the world gets objectively worse, becomes more appealing, right? Like this is one of the things that keeps me up at night is as the effects of climate change get worse, I suspect we will have more and more authoritarians seize power because their message of, no, this isn't a baked in problem that we didn't address decades past, and now we have to sort of manage it and live a reduced life as society. No, it's just crooks and idiots. And like we saw this with Trump a few months ago, where he was looking at California and saying like, oh no, it's just because the crooks and idiots didn't turn the water on. All of the LA wildfires would have gone away if they had just turned the water on. Like that's very appealing. Like if that were true, that would be so comforting. Like, oh, we are not now living in a world where your homes might just be destroyed. We're just living in a world where in the future we'll turn the water on. Like that would be so nice. It's not fucking true. But that distinction, like that stands out to me a lot because of course we do also have people on the left who believe the world is very simple. It's only crooks and idiots. And like, unfortunately, they're wrong too. And like sometimes the people they point to as crooks and idiots, I'm like, yes, that is a crook. Yes, I think Curtis Yarvin is a fucking idiot. And therefore I think we should make fun of him. I also don't think the entire world will be fine once we like disempower the guy. You know, like that's only one of the problems. There's a lot more because the world is complicated. But that divide and the unlevel playing field that results from one side getting to have more compelling messaging because they are lying both to the public and to themselves. Like that is, I think, one of the defining dynamics that has led us to the world we're in right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And
that to me is the first singularity, is how do we overcome our own irrationality? Because we will destroy ourselves independent of whatever AI does. We'll have destroyed ourselves before then.
That's a worry.
And on that point, with this whole AI focus that the right has had in their general, they don't want to improve their knowledge or their ideas. They want to stupefy everyone else's. And we see that just recently with the AI dominance plan that the Trump White House put out just a little while ago, in which they claim that they want to force LLM systems or AI systems to be, quote, objective and free from top-down ideological bias. But then they also later on say that things talking about unconscious bias, intersectionality, and systemic racism are not neutral. And so they want to have some top-down bias to get rid of the top-down bias, essentially. And like and there is a real concern that the right wing does have about AI. In fact, they've even formalized it into a slogan where they say that crypto is libertarian, AI is communist. And I think that phrase might be a little fascinating or confusing to people who have more progressive viewpoints and have generally a negative viewpoint about AI. But there's something there, I think. Anyway, I said a lot of stuff there, so feel free to pick whichever one you want to start with.
So one thing that just comes to mind with, right, like there is some obvious comedy in them saying there will be no top-down decisions about what the AI will do. And this is an order that we're giving from the top down. Yeah. It brings to mind, so I recently read this book called Adventure Capitalism by Raymond Crabe, which is about several decades experience of libertarians trying to build their own city or build their own like seasteading operation, flee and create their own societies, right? Like actual false cultures that they're just going to go and build. And it never works out. But he's got a really great line in there where he points out that all of these libertarian paradises start by insisting everyone here will be completely free so long as they agree with the rules that we will lay out in advance. Also, we, the libertarian billionaires who want to build this, we will be in charge of setting out those rules. It's like everything, like pure freedom for everyone so long as they follow my dictates. Like, man, that just means you want to be a fucking king. Like, this is not libertarianism in any like deep way. Like you've just decided to be the king and then everyone has the right to do what you said that they will do. Like the same with AI here. Like it's all very compelling so long as it's only at the sentence level. But if you form it into paragraphs, then it suddenly doesn't make any sense. We are going to declare from the top down that AI cannot be top down. Like, okay, guys, sure, that will last right up until AI says another thing that you don't like. This is what Elon Musk has been doing with Grok for months now, where anytime it's producing a result he doesn't like, he says, oh, we're going to go and change that. And that's how it ends up turning into racist mecha Hitler last week. Like, this stuff doesn't work all that well. I had some thoughts on the capitalism, communism thing as well, but I just got derailed from that. So,
okay, so no, go for it. Go for it. Yeah. So crypto libertarian AI communist.
Yeah, like I certainly buy the libertarian politics of crypto. And I've seen a couple examples of how crypto, in theory, could be used for progressive ends. But they're always like so strung out that they don't quite work out. And what really comes to mind is if you read the book Ministry of the Future, that has got a bit in it where it imagines a future where something blockchain based ends up being useful for taxing billionaires. Even there, the author, like I think 6 months later, the author was like, I looked into it more. It was Kim Stanley Robinson looked into it and was like, yeah, actually, I don't think blockchain would really work for that. But like there are ways, again, like I don't think, like all technologies have politics. And also, I don't think we should be purely tech determinist here. There's a world where you could use blockchain for non-pure right libertarian ends, but it's a libertarian technology. And then I think
and certainly the history literally is that. Yeah.
Right. Now, I think when we talk about the ideals of AI, having a system that has access to all the world's knowledge and needs to produce truth, like, I know you like to say this, that like reality has a left-leaning bias. Like, yeah, if we had that ideal system, I think that would end up working out. What I'm less sure of is for actually existing AI today, like the biases of actually existing AI are mostly going to be towards the things that make money for the AI companies, right? So like, will apparently GPT-5 is supposed to come out next month. I just saw a headline of, we'll see. But if GPT-5 is a meaningful advance, is that going to be a step towards communism? I'm going to guess no, because I don't think Sam Altman is going to actually build out a technology that leads us towards communism, because Sam Altman just believes in trying to make, like the guy wants there to be trillionaires and he wants to be one of them. And that means that any tendencies it would have against that are just going to end up getting cut down. In the same way, anytime Grok ends up saying a thing that Elon Musk doesn't like, he says, we need to re-engineer this so it fits my ideals. Now, in a world where we didn't have a few tech billionaires shaping the future of their technologies, would we end up having AI that leads us towards communism? Yeah, maybe. But in the world we have right now, I think all these technologies sort of just further empower the people who control them. The way to solve that is governments. However, look at our governments, and then I just kind of feel depressed and feel like we're screwed.
Yeah. Well, and that is why I really do want to encourage European governments to really invest in a lot of this stuff more. And to some extent, they've done that with like France with Mistral AI has done some interesting things. And obviously China is trying to do their own thing for their own purposes and necessarily obviously not the good guys over there. This does militate to the idea that I see a lot of technological Ludditism on the left. And the problem with that is, look, it's fine. Look, I'm in favor of making sure that executives are accountable and regulate, and businesses are regulated appropriately to protect people's rights. But at the same time, if you refuse to take part in discussions about things that will be important and already matter a great deal, then you are going to lose those discussions by default. Your opinion will not matter. Within lobbying in DC, there's always that phrase that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu.
Correct.
And that's, to me, like this, this is the age that we're in. Like people, I think a lot of people on the left don't understand this stuff is not going anywhere. Like LLMs, they're here for the future, and you have to figure out how to use them for yourself in some way. Otherwise you're going to become obsolete in the same way that, if you refuse to drive a car, again, like maybe not this moment right now, but like you have to figure out a way, especially like if you need a job, like you're, somebody who's trying to get a job, like you should use it in a way that is helpful to you. And it sucks. Maybe, you can lament that that's how it is, but why disarm yourself unilaterally?
So I want to press you on that a little bit, right? So the first thing I would note, Brian Merchant wrote my favorite book on the Luddites, called Blood in the Machine. It came out a couple of years ago. And his articulation of Luddism is one that I think we should embrace, which is essentially viewing Luddism at like the Luddite revolution being effectively about labor power back in an era where unions were illegal, right? So the reason why they're smashing the machines isn't because they believe no one should use technology. It's because they correctly are analyzing that a small number of owners are going to use these machines to put the workers out of jobs and instead hire child laborers. And the workers don't have a seat at the table unless they fight back. And so they engage in collective action and they use the tools that are available to them. From that perspective, Luddism today isn't necessarily saying, hey, no one should ever touch AI. It's saying, hey, we should really be focused on how actually existing, like we were talking about private equity earlier, like how will actually existing power structures make use of this to make my life, professional or personal, better or worse? And if I think it's worse, then I ought to be organizing and I ought to be pressuring. So that includes getting a seat at the table, but it includes getting a seat at the table to say, no, you will not fucking do this, or we will fight against you. We will counter pressure. Related to that, and this is kind of on a different note, I got to give the commencement address to not to like the big university, but to my school department this past year in GW School of Media and Public Affairs. And I wanted to say something to my students about AI. And the thing that I raised with them, and these are political communicators and journalists who are in the audience, was that the thing that bothers me about AI as it exists today for writers is that when you are leaning on AI, it is leading you to sound like everybody else. Like, again, that's what LLMs are for, is predicting the next word and cliches and sounding like people normally sound. And the work of as a writer, the work of figuring out how to sound like yourself is the craft. Like, that is the work that we're always doing. And like, I'm still trying to do that. And that kind of what I worry about in this moment, and the thing that I think is a comparative advantage for people who work it out, is like I would encourage writers not to use LLMs, not from a sort of Luddite, let's reject technology standpoint, but actually from a professional standpoint, figuring out how to sound just like yourself and not sound like everybody else is probably in the medium term how you succeed. So if everybody else is leaning on the thing that's going to do the early work for you, like I actually think that there's real value in rejecting that and doing the hard work of building up your skills. So there's something that helps you to stand out. So like for that reason, like I've never used AI in writing and I don't think I will. Not because it can't produce an okay paragraph for me, but because I don't want my paragraphs to be just okay. And I do kind of worry, certainly like teaching in a program that teaches political communicators and journalists, like I quite worry not that they're going to get washed out of the market because other people are using AI and they're not. I'm worried they're going to get washed out of the market, again, because private equity decides like whatever AI produces is good enough, I don't want to pay anybody. But then the people who are going to actually get jobs are going to be the ones who are able to do something that rises above that. So like I actually think leaning on that crutch is probably, at least for my students, not a good first step to begin with. Now I'm with you on like you need a seat at the table, you're on the menu. But there's a version of Luddism that actually embraces that and says, yeah, and we should also, when we get a seat at the table, be real clear on what is going to be on the menu and fight for that.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. And I would say for students, it's a different thing because, yeah, if you're in school, the whole point is to actually do the work yourself and not to have something else do it for you. But I guess I see it as more similar to like a calculator in math. Mm-hmm. Like when calculators came out and literally beginning with just simple arithmetic calculators and then later scientific calculators, graphing calculators, equation solving calculators, they all were proclaimed by some math teachers to be the end of math and no one will know how to do anything, and that certainly has been the case for, like I think people are less able to do math in their head now than they used to. I think that's a fact. But on the other hand, has it made people less numerate? I don't think that it has. And it's so technological advancements, you have to figure out how they work for you. So like, if you're doing, like if you're working on a calculus, problem, and you're a professional and you already know how to do calculus and you know how to run the derivative and you don't want to have to bother with 3 order derivatives, like, because that's a fucking waste of your time. It is a waste of your time. Like I put that thing into MATLAB, do it. Don't waste your time on that. But, don't think that the computer is going to
give you the original concept. So that's my general take on it, is that when it comes to, telling your HR person what they want to hear, hey, do it. Don't waste your time trying to figure out what kind of nonsense is going on in their head. But when it comes to having your own ideas, you need to do that work yourself.
That again sort of brings me back to Satisficing, right? Like, if what you need to do is sort of a box checking exercise, use the tools that make it very easy to check those boxes so you can focus on the other things. What worries me particularly again in writing is that I think people discount how much, like what I really have in mind is I just finished drafting this book. An awful lot of the work of the book is writing bad versions, then figuring out what is bad about it, and then making it better. And if I had the AI write the bad versions for me, that early, like the creative work of figuring out where am I getting stuck and how do I make this better, wouldn't actually be occurring. Like, this all brings to mind, John Warner's written a really good book called More Than Words, which is about AI and writing. He previously wrote a book that was attacking the 5-paragraph essay and saying we should destroy the thing, it's bad. So he's not saying like, oh no, education is over because AI can write your 5-paragraph essay. He's instead talking about like, what are we actually doing? Like, writing is thinking. And let's think about what we can use this stuff well for and also what it fills in. So it's if AI is a calculator, we should also figure out what are the things that we want a calculator for and where is a calculator actively not helpful.
Yeah, I fully agree there. And like, I see a lot of teachers or professors complaining that their students are using AI to do the work. And my response to them is, well, then your assignments suck and you're probably not a good teacher. That's what I would say. Because it's going back to sufficing. Your assignments are trash. And so you're getting trash in response. Garbage in, garbage out.
So again, the thing I want to rise in defense of, I think that's right. And anytime I have that conversation, I think that comes, I have tenure at a nice university. So I have the time and luxury to put in the work to make sure my assignments are good. There's an alternate universe where I didn't luck into this job, where instead I'm an adjunct teaching 5 or 6 classes every semester. And like the class that I'm teaching is whatever some university needed. In that world, I'm probably not as good at teaching and certainly not as good at like constantly I don't have the luxury to readjust all my assignments because again, like at the top, there was a decision to like cut off funding to higher education and just lean on adjuncts for everything. And they will be poorly paid and we don't care that means that they won't have the luxury time to make their assignments really good. That's a trade-off that was made well above all of us. And the downstream is like, when we then say, okay, all of you adjuncts need to radically overhaul all of your syllabi, it's like, sorry, for the money and no healthcare that you're paying them, no, they're not going to do that. So like, you're right, and also that just makes me want to yell at the university administrators and the people even above them who decided, like, fuck it, let's just monetize the hell out of higher education and like chase dollars and like, not make the learning experience a good one. Because we already underfunded that. Of course, now things are falling apart.
Yeah. No, that's a fair point. And it reminds me of the last thing that I wanted to talk about here today. And that is, a few months ago, you wrote a review of the book Abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson. Mm-hmm. And you argued that it was, and I agreed 100% with what you said. You said that this is a book for a different timeline. And it's solving problems that are not the problems that we have right now. And like, to me, I think that that's kind of the biggest problem of neoliberalism right now. And but not just neoliberalism. Like, I would say if you look at a lot of socialist discourse, they're doing the same stuff. Like they're building intricate sandcastles in the air while Trump is burning down the government.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like, guys, this policy stuff, it's fun to think about. Look, I can do this with you all you want, but we have to stop the bleeding now, to mix my metaphors. We have to put out the fire. And you have to be concerned, like, that should be your number one goal here. Not saying, oh, well, what's this fantasy economy thing I can come up with? We don't need that.
And to be clear, like, that is, I think, and I meant it as a harsher critique of their book tour than of their book, right? Because like books take a while. Like I I do not blame them for writing a book that was published just after Trump took office that isn't imagining Trump taking office. Like, that's just how publishing timelines work.
Yeah.
And there's like, it is a more interesting book in the world where Kamala Harris gets elected and Democrats have to figure out, what do we do? Like, how do we govern? What's our broad policy agenda? So the fact that it's a book that's not imagining like, oh, no, RFK Jr. is being the worst version of RFK Jr. and destroying scientific research and like medicine, like the fact of that stood out to me while reading the book. I don't mind that the like it's sad, but like I don't blame them for that. And then there was just sort of like, when you're doing a publicity tour, you need to explain why this is actually a perfect book for this moment. And there I felt like they kind of had to stretch so hard that they were probably pulling a muscle.
Yeah. And I mean, so much of the discourse, even now, I feel like more than 10 years after Trump first came down his brass escalator, and it's brass, people, it's not gold, and get it straight, that more than 10 years after he came down and launched his campaign, we're still having the same discourse in so much of the most elite center left places, that it's almost like people imagine that he's just going to go away, and that the people who voted for him, they'll come to their senses. And like, that phrase that Obama used, which people still believe this, that the fever will break. They still fucking believe this. I think they do, a lot of them. Or if they don't believe it, then they have no plan to counter it. So
that's what I wanted to get at, is because I agree with you. And also the question that I end up getting asked in those spaces is, okay, so what do we do? What's your plan? And my answer, like, my answer is some version of, well, I think we're kind of fucked, at least for a little while. Like, I think it takes 10 or 20 years to rebuild the administrative state and undo a lot of the immediate harms that are being caused right now. Like, just at a minimum, unless you have a constitutional convention, which at the moment, if that happened, it wouldn't go well because you have too many states that are run by Republicans. So, like, unless we fully reformat democracy after a massive crash that I would prefer to avoid, but is seeming more and more unavoidable, I can't see any way that we aren't stuck with this Supreme Court for the duration of its majority's lifetimes, just preventing any Democratic or progressive administration from achieving anything. Like, they have just decided Trump gets to be king, and if you are a Democrat, then actually you're not allowed to do anything. And those are unelected kings in robes, and they're not going anywhere unless we have massive constitutional reform. And if somebody says, Dave, realistically, do you think we're going to get constitutional reform as it stands right now? My answer is, fuck no. So, like, I end up in some sort of version of, yeah, I don't know, man. Like, I think we're kind of fucked, which isn't, like, that's not, like, that might be true, but it's not productive. And so I do think part of the instinct, the reason why it's like 10 years later and nobody has a good idea is that actually, like, there aren't any good ideas, right? Like, I started to smile when you mentioned it, like, people think he'll just go away, because, like, actuarially he will. Like, there is...
He will, yeah.
But like, I to be clear, I'm not advocating for anything. I will note that the man, when he travels abroad, like, a McDonald's apparently goes with him. And he's now the oldest president we've ever had, I think it is. And a world in which the hamburgers go through his system and run their course, and we are left with J.D. Vance trying to run this coalition, is a world that I think goes comically bad for J.D. Vance, because I don't think he can pull off what Trump has been pulling off in terms of scaring people and holding things together. So that is, like, you can't plan for that. Like, what happens after Trump has a heart attack because he eats too much red meat for his age? But also, like, if we're trying to imagine, like, the likely paths forward, like, at some point in the next 20 years, like, the hamburgers and the red meat will probably hit the guy. And there isn't a plan within the Republican Party for after Trump, in the same way that, as far as I'm not a Russia specialist, but I don't think there's a plan for Putin's party post-Putin. So that question of, like, we're living under an authoritarian who does not have a real second in command, at some point, actuarially, that will mean something, but nobody can plan for it. It's just a thing that will happen, and then you'll react. Like, that's not a plan, and I'd like to have a plan, but, like, that kind of is the answer, is shit's going to be really bad and chaotic for a long time in ways that it shouldn't be and are bad for democracy. And then hopefully we work our ways out after an awful lot of chaos that I wish we had avoided.
Yeah. Well, and I think the conclusion that the neoliberal establishment of the Democratic Party has been trying to avoid for decades is that in a crisis of democracy and inequality, there will either be democratic socialist restraints on capital or there will be fascistic restraints on capital. There won't be any other alternative. That's it. And so if you have to accept that in the same way. And Europe has proven very definitively that you can still have a business, you can still make shitloads of money and have a fancy life and get all the things you want, but also have a society that's not being burned to the ground by religious zealots. Like, they've shown that this works and that people can have healthcare. Like, that's what's so bizarre about American politics, is that people are always saying, oh, this is not possible. It's not possible. Well, it is. And people already did it. So, just overcome your fear a little bit. It's okay to have a little bit less.
And it's not even like fully automated luxury communism. Like, what we're actually just talking about here, it's like, I think sometimes about, like, you give me a time machine and a magic wand and let me go back to like the 1980s and just like either add a wealth tax or prevent a bunch of the tax cuts. Like, still the rest of capitalism, but just with higher tax rates. And I'm pretty sure we get, certainly within the internet stuff, like, I'm pretty sure we have an internet, like all the things that we like about the internet we still get. Just fewer tech billionaires or tech billionaires that aren't centi-billionaires, and like some modest restraints and regulations and competition policy. Like that's not like pure, like overthrowing capitalism even. That's just like capitalism within like Keynesian limits. Like, that works okay. You just are going to need to accept those limits. And in the 1980s, we stopped accepting those limits and just said, what if we let markets do everything? But we're putting markets in quotes because it's really just whatever a few rich guys want. And we've run that experiment for 40 years. It doesn't fucking work very well. You can have a little capitalism as a treat, just like there also needs to be tax policy and some regulations. Deal.
Yep.
Yeah.
Very reasonable. Very reasonable. All right. So Dave, for people who want to keep up with your work, what are your recommendations for that?
I would love for people to read my Substack. I don't love them on Substack. It would be expensive to go elsewhere. So it's Dave Karpf, karpf.substack.com. I write once or twice a week there. I'll have a book coming out in the spring or the summer 2026. And if you subscribe to the Substack, you will hear me promote that book a lot. And it should be a very good book.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks for being here.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right, so that is the program for today. I appreciate everybody joining us for the conversation. And you can always get more if you go to theoryofchange.show, where we have the video, audio, and transcript of all the episodes. And my thanks especially to everybody who is a paid subscribing member on Patreon or Substack. Thank you very much for your support. You have unlimited access to the archives, and I am really grateful that you are doing that. And if you can't afford to do a paid subscription right now, I understand that. But if you can share one of your favorite episodes with your friends or family, or post it on social media, that would be really appreciated. I thank you very much for that as well. And if you're watching on YouTube, please click the like and subscribe button so you can get notified whenever we have a new episode or clip. Thanks very much, and I will see you next time.